By the end of this video, you will learn why you really want the Bible translators to call you plain, like they did with Jacob, why you really want the kind of wife who can haul around hundreds of gallons of water, why angels don't use ladders, and why you don't need to wear spandex to see the face of God. But before all of that, if you watched last week's video, you'll remember that before we get into the content, I asked you a question from the game Seek. And this week's question is, what does the place name Peniel mean? Now leave your answer in the comments and I'll give you the answer towards the end of the video. So today we're diving into some really fun principles and insights that I found in this week's Come Follow Me reading of Genesis 24 through 33. And it's a massive amount of reading, right? It's 10 chapters and I'm not going to go through it all, but I've picked up a few things that I thought would be cool to focus on. And if you want to go even deeper, then head over to my Substack for more, links in the description. Now that's taken care of, let us arise and go up into the text. The first thing we're going to look at is the contrast between Esau and Jacob in Genesis 25. Esau is described as a cunning or skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a plain man dwelling in tents. A surface reading could make Jacob sound like a passive guy who's just really into indoor glamping, right? While his brother is out conquering the world. But the Hebrew tells a completely different story. Our English translations are severely underselling what's actually happening. The word used for Jacob is tam, and it doesn't mean plain. It's a highly specific term that implies integrity, completeness, and being perfected in a ritual or moral sense. It's the same root word, tamim, that God uses when he tells Abraham to be perfect when he's establishing his covenant with him in Genesis 17. So being a tam man is an active state of ritual precision, which is the total opposite of his birth name, right? Because his birth name, Yaakov, is rooted in the word for heel, and that implies crookedness or supplanting. So tam is the direct mechanical counterpoint to that crookedness. Jacob is choosing a path of precision and integrity over his natural inclinations, and we'll come on to this later. By the way, I go into tam a lot more on my Substack, the link's in the description. So if you think about it, here's this tam man working on ritual and moral precision, and he's dwelling in tents. What do we associate the tent with in the ancient world? It's the future tabernacle and the temple, right? And Jacob's not just hanging out in the living room. We could speculate to think he's staying in a sacred space to learn the ordinances of his fathers, of Abraham and Isaac, and he's operating on a priestly level. Now, Esau represents what we might call the natural man model. He relies entirely on physical force, on secular competition out in the field, and immediate gratification. And we see that perfectly when he sells his birthright. He sells his birthright for a single bowl of red stew. He's hungry now, so he sacrifices his future. Jacob, the tam man, represents a completely different logic. He's an apprentice engaging in what early restoration theology, specifically the lectures on faith, calls mental exertion instead of physical force. And this completely reframes some of his later physical feats, because later on, Jacob single-handedly rolls this massive stone away from a well. And it shows that he has this immense physical strength, but he kept it disciplined under covenantal restraint. His strength wasn't defined by killing animals in the field. It was defined by his self-mastery, his ability to remain within the sacred space, to master his own appetites. That's his true power. So think about this for yourself right now. How do you define your own strength as a man, as a father, as a leader? Are you constantly trying to dominate the field or of secular competition? Is your worth directly tied to the corporate ladder or how much you can hustle? Or are you prioritizing the quiet, intense, mental and spiritual exertion required to master yourself? That's the challenge I found from this text, to redefine my strength and figure out how to make my own home a tent of meeting, a site of actual priesthood ordinance, rather than just a domestic shelter where I crash after a long day out in the field. And building that kind of tent requires a fundamental shift in how we view the partnership inside of it. Now, we can't build that sacred space alone, not fully, not ultimately. To see why, we need to talk about Esau and Jacob's mother, Rebekah. In Genesis 24, Abraham sent off his servant to find Isaac a wife. Remember, Isaac's the son promised by covenant to bring about a family to bless the entire world. And he needs a wife to match. So Abraham's servant travels back to Abraham's homeland to find a wife for Isaac. Rebekah is literally the answer to the servant's prayer. We then go through the scene at the well with Rebekah fetching hundreds of gallons of water for 10 camels, meeting her father and brother Bethuel and Laban, and asking Rebekah's hand in marriage for Isaac. But for some reason, Bethuel and Laban want Rebekah to delay her departure. They want to keep her around for at least 10 more days for some reason. But finally, they decide to call Rebekah in and just ask her directly if she's willing to journey to this unknown land to marry a man she's never met. And her response is a single, highly decisive Hebrew word, elek. It translates to, I will go. What's really interesting is why that single word is so vital. It's the equivalent of the famous Leka command, the go forth command that was given to Abraham years later. But there's a massive difference here. Abraham was responding to a direct, overwhelming divine command from God. Rebekah's exercising complete autonomy on her part. She's responding to a providential situation entirely on her own initiative. Then later, when she's struggling with a difficult pregnancy, she doesn't wait for Isaac to get a revelation for her. She goes and inquires of the Lord herself. Her proactive nature continues. And because she initiates that inquiry, she receives her own direct oracle, a profound revelation about the set times of the two nations struggling within her womb. This exemplifies a pattern for what a priesthood partnership actually looks like. Because Rebekah's a perfect model of an ezer kenegdo, and we often translate that as helpmeet, right, in Genesis with Eve. But that can make her and women in general sound like a subordinate assistant, and that's rubbish, right? Ezer is the same word used to describe God intervening to save humanity. It's divine level support. So an obvious question might be, how does Isaac respond to a wife with that kind of spiritual proactivity? Does he ever feel threatened that she went and got her own revelation? Of course not. When we see comments on how Isaac's response to Rebekah's arrival and her presence in the text, it's always about comfort, it's always about consolation. And a man who understands the holy order of God is never threatened by a partner's spiritual proactivity. He recognizes it, he encourages it, he embraces it, he joins with it. And if you want to build authority in your home, you have to honor your partner's autonomy. You move together or you don't move at all. So far, we've looked at self-mastery and an example of priesthood partnership in the home. Now we're moving on to building a structure. In Genesis 28, Jacob has his famous dream of a ladder. When you hear ladder, are you thinking some sort of rickety aluminium thing from B&Q or, I guess, Target in the States, right? But the word is sulam, and it's used exactly once in the Bible. And it actually describes a ziggurat type of construction, this ramp, a man-made mountain designed to bridge the gap between heaven and earth. And some scholars think that a ziggurat is what the Tower of Babel was. But this is obviously very different. This word of this construction is only ever used once in the Bible. It's different to that. So in the text, in the story, Jacob's just cheated Esau out of his blessing. So he's sent out on the run by his parents to Laban, Rebekah's brother. And on his way, Jacob stops at a certain place, Makom in Hebrew. But through this vision that Jacob has, this place, this certain place, this no-name place, this Makom, is transformed into Bethel, the house of God, the gateway to heaven. And there are messengers, angels, going up and down this ramp constantly, and it shows just how active God and the heavens are with what's going on in the world. Because what are those angels doing, right? And it's here that the Lord renews his covenant with Abraham, with Jacob. So bring this into your own living room right now. Look around your living space. Is it just a makom, a certain place? Is it just an anonymous shelter where you eat and sleep? Or are you putting in the mental and spiritual exertion it takes to transform it into a Bethel? Building a Bethel doesn't mean literal construction, obviously. It means treating our homes as a site of ritual order and intentional, choreographed repetition. It means prioritizing the mental and spiritual exertion of study, of prayer, and observing the set times of the Lord over the immediate gratification of whatever secular distraction is on our phones. We have to build that ramp. We have to actively shift and step out of anonymity. We have to claim our spiritual inheritance and build that figurative ziggurat ramp in our own lives to access the ministering of angels. And it's all about intention. But here's the catch. Getting the authority doesn't mean the struggle is over. It's actually the prerequisite for the final test. And in Genesis 32, we're at the Jabbok Ford. This is a liminal space, a boundary zone, a threshold between one reality and another. And at this point in the story, Jacob sent his family and his flocks across the river. And he's left entirely alone in the dead of the night. And the text says that he wrestles a man until daybreak. This wrestle is the literalization of his lifelong mental and spiritual exertion. Remember his birth name, Yaakov, the heel grabber. We said earlier it's associated with the crookedness of the natural man. It's the part of him that relied on trickery to get his brother's birthright. The part of him that used cleverness to survive. Now during this wrestle, he's renamed Israel, he who strives with God. The root of that transformation is Yashar, which means straight or upright. Jacob is being purged of those negative traits. This wrestle is transforming him from crooked to straight. This wrestle is the movement from simply having hope, which is the assurance of things not seen, to possessing actual power to change. It's the principal power of action. But that power comes at a steep physical price for Jacob. During the wrestle, the text says the assailant touches Jacob's hip socket. The Hebrew word for that touch is naga, and it's almost a magic touch in the original language. It's a light contact which produces a massive, devastating effect, wrenching Jacob's hip completely out of joint. Now, Jacob walks away from this encounter with a permanent limp. It's the literal price of experience. To prevail with God in this context doesn't mean you beat God in a wrestling match. We don't overpower the divine. It means we have the endurance to hold on through the dark night of the soul, refusing to let go despite the pain until you obtain the actual knowledge of God's acceptance. What's really interesting to me is that throughout these 4 things that I've picked out, there are obviously parallels and people to learn from in the Book of Mormon as well. Dwelling in tents, the famous short verse in 1 Nephi, and my father dwelt in a tent. Is that to point us to what Lehi was doing with these temple things and releasing him with Jacob? Rebekah's I will go. Obviously, 1 Nephi 3:7, I will go and do what the Lord has commanded me to do. The wrestle with God, Enos, that's what he's doing throughout, and it completely changes him as well, to the point where he's praying to know if God's there, and he makes this progression to praying for his deepest enemy, the Lamanites. And what we're going to come on to now is, again, directly related to the brother of Jared, and you'll see why now, because I want to leave you with this one final thought. So Jacob names, and this is the answer to the question, by the way, Jacob names the site of the wrestle Peniel, which means face of God. And that's the ultimate model for anyone seeking this kind of authority. The goal isn't just to be a good person in a tent. The goal of the greater priesthood is to obtain the power to literally see the face of God and live. To move from the anxiety and calculation of the past into the actual power of the future. You see where the brother of Jared comes in? The veil is parted for the brother of Jared, and he sees God and he's able to live. The same is what's happening here. So, if you want to apply this to your own life, you first have to identify the Jacob within yourself. Where are you still relying on deceit? Where has the immediate gratification of the red stew replaced your covenant integrity? It's a hard question to ask ourselves, but we must embrace this spiritual wrestle. We must treat our prayers not as passive waiting, but as an active striving with God. And most importantly, we have to learn to value our own figurative limbs our inward scars that we carry from our own dark nights that aren't failures. They're the witness of our growth with God. Now, if you want to see my full study on the events at the Jabbok Ford and Peniel, again, I put the deep dive over in my Substack. The link's in the description. And come and join the conversation over there. Now, as we've already talked through and revealed, the answer to the quiz question of what does the place name Peniel mean? It's the face of God. And if you've got that right, let me know in the comments. Now, go and build the altar, and I'll see you next week.